What's good, everybody? What's good? Welcome to another edition of TorraineWalker TV. I am TorraineWalker. Thank you all for coming back in. Um, I wanted to do this live today because I wanted to have a conversation about some very unusual things that are jumping off in the world of politics. Some of you already know what's going on. Most of you should already if you haven't watched it, if you watched the news. Last Friday, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the case of Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health Organization that the Constitution of the United States does not confer any right to abortion. This ruling effectively overturns Roe v. Wade, abolishing the federal abortion protections in the United States and handing abortion policy back to individual states. This was preceded by the leaking of a memo in May stating that Roe v. Wade was likely to be overturned. The leaking of that memo sparked a lot of outrage, and then with Friday's final ruling, that sparked massive protests nationwide. Every city is seeing protests against the rolling back of Roe v. Wade. And we've also seen protests on the other side from supporters of the rollback of Roe v. Wade and the Supreme Court decision. The court ruled 6-3 to uphold the Mississippi abortion ban being challenged in the case, and 5-4 to overturn Roe altogether. This has sparked a lot of responses on the streets and online, but in the online space, a disturbing thing has been happening. For better or for worse, Justice Clarence Thomas has become the face of the decision and the focus of anger at the decision. That hostility at the rollback of Roe v. Wade has devolved into racist abuse against Clarence Thomas from white liberals and feminists. Now, I want to start the show by saying that I am not a fan of Clarence Thomas. I'm not a fan of how he got into how he managed to get his position. I'm not a fan of the rulings he's handed down from the bench. But the fact that so many people who claim to be our allies are so free with the N-word and are so free with using language that comes, you would think that comes from the right, so-called, is something that we need to talk about. There's been tweets calling Thomas the N-word, calling him a coon and a porch monkey and all these sorts of things. And I'm not saying that he doesn't have a right to be attacked. I'm not saying that nobody has a right to push back on the ruling. I just think that's very dangerous. So what does that say about the so-called allies who depend on Black support, who can freely let that language fly, but still want your support for whatever they have? I want to open the floor up to some questions. I have a really good panel. Some people are dragging a little bit and coming in, but I'm going to bring in a lady who's a friend of the show, Zakia Sankia Japar. I'd love to hear her conversation and hear what she has to say about it. So, Sister Zakia, how you doing?
Peace and blessings, brother. I'm good.
Good to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a minute. Good to see you, brother.
All right. So I don't know how much of the opening you heard, but yeah, we're basically going to talk about the rollback of Roe v. Wade, the abolishment of Roe v. Wade, and the pushback from some of our white and feminist allies against Justice Thomas
Ain't
when
my
he was.
allies.
I didn't want to do the air quotes, but I'm just saying, we're going to
I
talk about
got
that
you.
and talk about how free they are with some of the language they've been using against him. So
Yeah,
what are
I
your
saw
thoughts?
that. Yeah, I saw that. I mean, if you're a Black person that don't know that white liberals are also pretty racist, I don't really know what to tell you. Like, I mean, they're just as racist as white conservatives. They just use their racism in a different way. But I think you're absolutely right that yeah, that's one of the things that I saw. Yeah, the ER, like, yeah, I mean, like they think that it's okay um to do this. And so for me, there is not one circumstance, and I need to say I'm also not a fan of Clarence Thomas. I mean, he's anti-Black as well. But there is never going to be a circumstance where I'm going to defend this type of shit. I mean, excuse me, this type of stuff
It's okay.
again.
Feel free.
Yeah, you know what I mean? There's just no way I'm going to ever defend this. Whether it's against, you know, Clarence Thomas or any other kind of like anti-Black person in a position of power. Yeah. And I think it's wild that you got Black liberals who seem to be. I know you are on Twitter a little bit more than I am, but they seem to be silent on these different tweets that you just showed as evidence, which I think is wild.
You know, Well, here's the thing. Like I said at the top of the show, and I'm probably going to have to reiterate this over and over. I'm not a fan of Clarence Thomas. I do think that he is a Tom. I do think that he has been very detrimental to the advancement of Black people and other people in this country from his rulings from the bench. And I feel like I'm not, and I think anybody who has an issue with him absolutely has the right to say whatever they want to say as far as that they want to push back against him. I'm very concerned about the fact that people who call themselves liberals and call themselves allies, who are white women and white feminists, are so free with using that language against a Black man instead of using other language they could use. You get what I'm saying?
Exactly. No, I agree with that. Yeah, I'm not a fan of Clarence Thomas, but there's no circumstances where I would ever agree or approve of or high five any type of white liberal, conservative, or white otherwise person to use that type of language. Against a Black person. There's just not any circumstances where I'll ever think that that's okay. Not for me.
All right. Now here's the thing. Like I said at the beginning, he's become the face of the ruling, but the ruling came down in a 5-4 decision. 5-4, 5-4, abolishing Roe v. Wade, 4 against. There were he was
I thought
joined
it was
by
six.
the ruling was 6-3. The original case was because of against an abortion clinic in Mississippi, in Jackson,
Right,
Mississippi. The original case was Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health Organization. That was the case that went to the Supreme Court.
right.
That was the one that was struck down first, and then it was challenged in Roe v. Wade, where it became an overturning of Roe v. Wade, where it was another decision, 5-4.
Oh,
5
okay.
in favor of overturning Roe v. Wade, 4 against. There were two separate cases. They were bundled together. That's in the public mind. But the justices who voted against Roe v. Wade were Clarence Thomas. There were also Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. So
There,
you
right.
had one Black man, one white woman, and 3 white men. But
Exactly.
you haven't seen the level of vitriol against the other justices who voted
Especially the
against
white
Roe v.
woman,
Wade.
you would think that the vitriol would really be against her. She's a woman.
Yeah, you haven't. No, I haven't seen. I have seen very little pushback or any kind of personal insults against that woman. And
I
like I
haven't
said,
seen any.
yeah. And if this is the year of the woman, and women are supposed to be in solidarity, you would think she would be the first line of attack, but nobody said anything.
Yeah,
But
I think that's interesting too. And Alito, if I'm not mistaken, he actually wrote the opinion, right?
yeah.
So how Clarence
hmm
Thomas is the face? I'm so confused.
I don't understand it either. I don't know if it's because he feels like he has to continue the legacy of his mentor, Scalia. That might be part of it. I don't know if he's somebody who they set up to be the fall guy to take the heat of this, so everybody else can continue on doing what they're doing, because this is the most ruling that's got the most attention. But they have handed down several horrible decisions from the bench in the past 3 or 4 days, but nobody's really talking about. Everybody's so focused on this, but what I'm talking about is the fact that all these people who claim to be liberal and progressive, I haven't seen it from a lot of progressive, but mostly liberals, they're calling this man porch monkey, calling him hateful slurs that you would think would come from the Jim Crow South and from the alt-right, but these are coming from our so-called allies.
No, this coming from liberals, yeah.
Yeah, and that's my point. So
yeah, porch monkey is real. That's a real white slur right there. Like I ain't heard that in years. A porch monkey?
What I'm saying?
Damn.
That's real old school.
That's real old school, right?
Yeah, I don't know who this individual is, but apparently she's really connected to a lot of liberal causes. But if you're pulling that one out, you got somebody in your family from the 50s who's been saying that around you or saying that around your mother when you were a child.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
A dirty porch monkey at that, a dirty one.
Yeah. And this person, I don't know who she is, but this whole thing about giving somebody permission to use the N-word on him, what's going to happen
is you as a white person give anybody permission to use the N-word? They are they think,
What's going to happen is somebody is going to use this out in company with somebody, and somebody's going to get severely hurt. Is what's going to happen.
Get their ASS toe up in public.
Well, let's move on from that. Why do you think that's being allowed? Because there hasn't been any real pushback against that, except for the one woman who said something really hateful and she had to delete it, this person here. Other than that, this is just the most glaring example, but people have been saying this all weekend and there hasn't been any pushback on social media. There hasn't been any sort of really consequences for people saying these things. And a lot of these people are in charge of organizations.
Oh, this person is in charge of an organization?
I don't think it's really that big, but there's several people who said similar things who are in charge of like, election organizations and get out the vote organizations, things like that. I'll be pulling some of those up in a little bit. But let me
Oh
ask you, why do
wow.
you think there's been so little pushback?
Um, I think that people feel like that, well, Clarence Thomas as an individual is disposable, but I think it's dangerous that if you're going to give white people permission to say things like that, I just think that's a very dangerous precedent to be set. And I think that it needs to remain very clear that the black grassroots community ain't with none of that. Like, these bougie Negroes who got positions and get paid from white people, I think that they are being quiet because they feel like maybe their positions in these white liberal institutions could be jeopardized if they speak up, or their money could be jeopardized if they speak up and say, hey, I ain't with Clarence Thomas either, but you can't be calling him no porch monkey around me. Come on, man. Like, no, you need to find some more words. I'm cool with you being against, the decision and all of that, but to go to the most racist tropes where they literally used the hang black man back in the day, nah, we ain't doing that. So I think there's a little bit of fear there because a lot of these black folks are connected to these, white liberals, and they are in paid positions to push a white liberal agenda.
Can you talk about that a little bit more about the white liberal agenda?
Well, I mean, it's a white liberal agenda. It's not a black agenda. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's a white liberal agenda in terms of what all that is. I don't know because I don't hang around in those areas. You know what I'm saying? So I am not of that ilk. But I do know that these are black people who feel a certain type of economic, at least, allegiance to these people because these people's pockets are deep. People think the white conservatives' pockets are deep. White liberals' pockets are deep. Like, just look at the companies that have come out since the decision saying, oh, we'll pay for our employees' transportation. I mean, there's several Fortune 500 companies, maybe about 10 or 15 that have come out from banks. I think Disney, you know what I mean? Like, so Uber, I mean, so and they're not even technically employees, the people, the drivers at least. You know what I mean? They fought back to make sure that the drivers couldn't be full employees. I don't even know if people know that, but in California, they they fought tooth and nail to make sure that the drivers for Uber and Lyft remain contractors. That way they didn't have to pay them benefits. They didn't have to pay health care. They don't have to, you know what I mean? But now all of a sudden y'all ready to pay for transportation for abortions?
Mm-hmm.
Black folks better wake up and quick.
All right. Well, that brings up another question. Why are so many corporations throwing money at this after the fact? Because there were a lot of things that could have been done on the back end. I know you've worked in politics and you know what I'm talking about. When there's back in May, the memo got leaked that said that it was very much a possibility that Roe v. Wade was going to be overturned.
Yeah, I knew it was over then when they leaked it. I knew that it was going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, but when that happened, why wasn't there more of a pushback from a lot of corporations if they were really serious about trying to defend this legislation or this ruling, to try to influence things through lobbyists, or try to make some things happen on the back end, where the justices or whether the people who are in power to try to stop this or put some stop gaps in place to maybe either file a brief or something to stop this before it happened? Because now all of a sudden they have money to throw at this after the fact. But if they had money to throw at this after the fact, where was that money before that to move into the lobbying, trying to put people into awareness of this?
That's the question of the day. I mean, this is about money. So is it cheaper for these companies to pay for an abortion or to pay for maternity leave for 6 months? Which one?
That's a very good question.
I'm serious. Is it cheaper for them to pay for the abortion up front or to deal with a pregnant woman the entire 9 months working, which she's going to have to go off for doctor's appointments? She might have to be on bed rest. And then after the baby is born, you got a lot of companies that have started to adopt more progressive policies especially in the nonprofit sector, which is where I work, you can get up to 6 months off to take care of your baby. The first 3 months is paid your full salary. The second 3 months of the 6 months that you get off, you get up to half of your salary. And a lot of bigger corporations have adopted similar policies. So I'm going to ask again, which one is cheaper for the company? There's your answer.
And that
it's dollars and cents.
Now here's the thing. If you look at other culture, if you look at other countries, not to say that they're perfect, but if you look at other countries, there's a much more comprehensive safety net.
No,
I'm going to move there.
Talk about that. Oh,
I'm going to go there.
Let's talk about, especially Western European companies.
I'm getting ready to go there.
Okay,
I'm getting ready to go there. No, I'm just saying. If you look at the social safety nets in countries like England, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, especially France, Germany, Sweden, Italy to a point, there is a safety net in place where if you are a physically healthy employee and you have a family or you have a child, there are subsidies in place for you to be able to take off work and raise your child, almost to the point where, like, I think in Germany it's almost like eight like the first 10 months of the child's birth.
Germany. It's a whole year. It is? Hey, yes.
Yeah. And then there's facilities in a lot of those jobs where you can bring your child to work and they have qualified licensed healthcare for your child, and you can move away from whatever your work is to go deal with your child and then come back to work. There's a much more comprehensive social safety net, which also enhances the quality of work, and it enhances the quality of life. Because if you're not concerned about trying to feed your child, and you're not concerned about who's taking care of your child, and you can still work, and you can still be a part of a family, that is good for the family. That's good for the marriage if you're married, or if you're not, or if you're a mother, and it makes you a more productive member of society. Here, no such thing. You miss 1 or 2 days and you're fired with a child. What are your thoughts on that? Because I can tell you're getting ready to chomp at the bit to get on that. So what are your thoughts?
Not only that, let's just get real. In most Western European countries, abortion is illegal. Mm-hmm. Let's go back to 1987. And I know people have been sharing the Jane Elliott clip. It's real. It's absolutely real. And I have to tell your audience, I knew about the birth dearth from the great Dr. Amos Wilson. Dr. Amos Wilson referenced this book in one of his lectures. These people have been knowing about the European birth dearth or negative birth rates for decades. In the opening of the book, Ben Wattenberg, a Jewish white man, wrote that there are not enough white babies being born in the United States. He said there's 3 ways we can deal with this. One thing we can do, like many Western European countries have been doing, is pay women to have babies. You referenced the wonderful policies that encourages white women to have babies in Germany. And not just Germany, but Sweden, the UK, a lot of the Western European nations have very, very broad, robust maternity laws in terms of encouraging white women to have babies and supporting them and giving them up to 12 months off paid to have babies. He said we could do that, but in America, we would also have to pay women of color and Black women to do that. So we can't do that. So write that off. We can't do that. He said the other thing that we can do is through immigration. He said the problem is most of the people that are immigrating to America now are other people of color. So let's scratch that. He said the final thing that we can do is that looking at the amount of babies that are being aborted, 60% are white. We can deal with that. We can stop white women from having all of these abortions. That's in the birth dearth.
You know what? This is something I think a lot of people don't understand either.
No.
A lot of the European safety net and a lot of what I just talked about and what you talked about, a lot of that came out of a lot of policy that was started in the 30s in fascist Italy and in the Third Reich. Because one of the fundamental tenets of fascist Italy, I think Mussolini started this in 1938, where they were giving subsidies to Italian mothers to have more children because they needed a workforce and they needed a military because Italy was trying to create an empire in the Mediterranean. This was when, you know, Mussolini attacked Ethiopia, which was Abyssinia at the time, and Libya. They were trying to create a new Roman Empire. So what they needed was bodies, and they needed soldiers. Same thing with Germany. Birth rates and creating a population of quote unquote pure Germans to populate the new order was a strong tenet in the Third Reich. So I'm not saying that that's what's going on now, but a lot of these ideas came out of that era where it was based in eugenics. It was based in fascist white racial theory.
All of this is about eugenics. Let's just be real.
Yeah.
All of it.
We're gonna get there. Yeah, we're gonna go there now. We're gonna get into that. But I just wanted to let people know that a lot of these ideas and a lot of the things we're dealing with now had their roots in race science and eugenics in the 1920s that became codified in the 1930s.
Absolutely.
So let's move on from that. We got a lot to play with that. There's a couple of more people who are they just hit me up who said they're going to join us in a little bit. But while we're waiting on them, I want to talk a little bit more, and I want to cycle it back to what we were talking about earlier. The fact that so many people who present themselves as allies and present themselves as friends of Black people. What do you think it says that if they had an issue with the Black person who legislated or held down a ruling in a way that they didn't like, then instead of attacking him personally and instead of attacking the merits of his decision, they automatically went to the worst white racist slurs, but they still want to be your friend? How do you rationalize that in your mind? If you that you can say that you're an ally of Black people, but this is the thing.
No, I don't. My politics is I'm a Black nationalist. I'm a Pan-African nationalist. So I don't reconcile none of that in my mind. I don't even play the ally game. Okay. So I'm like the wrong person to ask that question to. So I don't even play. I'm serious. Like, I don't even play those games with so-called white allies. They could never be that comfortable, ever, to talk like that in front of me because of just who I am in my politics. You know, people like to say Black nationalists, Pan-Africanists are racist, but Black people don't have the power to be racist. I have the power to control my environment. And if I don't want fake white people around me and in my environment and close to me and my family, that's how I operate my life. And this is a prime reason why you cannot trust them, period. I mean, I know there's probably people watching this now. Oh my God, I have white friends and I can trust them. Okay.
All right. I got some people who are coming in now. Sister Friday Jones, she's out in LA, so we had to wait for her to come in. I'm going to bring her in right now so she can join the conversation.
Awesome.
I can see her laughing from the side right now.
Hey, sis.
Hey. Yes, you know, I'm driving, so you guys are going to have to bear with me, but I really do think this is a very important conversation for our white allies. They need to hear us centering ourselves around this decision that has people getting the police treatment that we are typically the recipients of.
Right, for sure.
All right, everybody, I got two more people who are supposed to come in, so I'm trying to do everything at once. Friday, can you introduce yourself a little bit and tell people who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I am Friday Jones. I am a modern day reparationist. I co-chair two organizations. One is a national org, and the second is a local org that has been really instrumental in the California reparations effort. And so I've been digesting these opinions from a constitutional space with this reparations sort of understanding, because in California, the state constitution and the federal constitution mattered. And so it's kind of interesting the things that we're not seeing, but that is an intro on who I am for the purposes of the show.
Okay, cool. Well, let's jump right into it. What are your thoughts on all these so-called allies of ours who push back against Clarence Thomas with the most hateful racial slurs, but they still want to be your friend?
Honestly, you gotta wonder with brother Elon Musk, like, is this the kind of Twitter world that he wanted? Because it's been it's just been off the rails. I think that the decision, like you said before I joined, I was watching, it's not like the Supreme Court consists of all these like Black justices. He is one
Right.
justice who helped to make this decision. And it just, in terms of racial climate, when we have all of this so-called pushback against critical race theory, it makes you, it doesn't make me wonder, because it just, to me, makes it abundantly clear that this is how folks get down in their private time. They're just being very
Exactly.
super vocal with it. And honestly, I don't know, like, there hasn't been a lot of, oh, this person lost their job because of their comments. Like, we're not seeing that kind of fallout. We're seeing a couple of closed and suspended accounts. But this, to me, gets back to like Reconstruction and
Yes.
deconfederizing. Like, that did not happen after emancipation in the country. We had the Compromise of 1877, and then you fast forward, the Black folks did their pension movement, and when that pension movement died down, it died down around the time of the Red Summer in the United States. And so this is a time where anti-Black racism really could be propped up. The DOJ could come in and really aggressively kind of prosecute people. That would be new for the American public, but that's not the response you're seeing at all. And I'm just like amazed in a way that we have all of these so-called laws on the books, but what's the difference if you have a law if it's not being enforced? And I don't feel like there are enough protections, particularly for members of the freedmen and the descendant community here in the United States. Like, this is a time where if you really want this society to look a certain way, there are actions that could be taken by the federal government, even with some of these people with hate speech, and I call them terroristic acts. I mean, even though you're not downright threatening him, the fact that you're using that language is to dehumanize, is to cause a sense of fear, is to devalue. And to me, I think that it needs to be deconfederized, and that has not happened here. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, and then that brings up another point. If you saw, and this is my opinion, if we saw any of this language being used against like Amy Coney Barrett or Kavanaugh or some of the other justices, the Secret Service would be at these people's doors by, what is it, Tuesday now? They would have been there Monday.
Period.
That speaks to how little this man, even though we don't like to admit it, but it is the truth. He is a Black person. It shows how little his life is considered by the people he surrounded himself by. And it feels like almost a tragedy, because if you have allied yourself with people who think so little of other Black people, and you think that you're going to be the special one just because you carry out their wishes, I don't want to say it's a wake-up call, because I doubt it is, but it should be a wake-up call for people who feel like they can ally with people like that and think they're going to be okay. Friday, can you hear me?
Exactly right.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking on a response. I mean, honestly, I don't think that highly of Kavanaugh. I think he comes kind of out of this weird elitist, rapey culture, and he's on the bench due to privilege. So is the hate speech that we're hearing too far from that culture? I would argue it's not. And like, no one is saying that either, because again, we don't get to center ourselves in mainstream news media. But we have a very unique opportunity here from a constitutional point of view. Our Constitution can be changed by a 2/3 vote with the House and the Senate, or 2/3 of the House and Senate could say, we actually want to have a constitutional convention, where the sole purpose of that convention is to modify the Constitution. And there are things, including the makeup of the Supreme Court, that should be changed. And instead of all these people marching in the street, I mean, I don't understand why there's not a movement to call your congressman and call your senator and demand a constitutional convention because the Dems or whoever, I mean, Trump was in office because no one took the time to quote unquote codify. When they talk about codifying this into law, it means making it constitutional. And the whole overturning of Roe versus Wade was based on Constitution. And now, in my opinion, what is his name? Clarence Thomas. He's talking about privacy and rights to privacy and potentially overturning, I can't remember the names of the cases, but he's talking about overturning these other cases that have to do with privacy and the fact that the Constitution doesn't guarantee your privacy. And so again, I don't understand, like, he's being forward thinking with contraception. When this first happened, I was like, well, why aren't women in particular just like, yeah, get those Plan Bs right next to the Tylenol so that I don't, you know, let's minimize the effects of this decision. You don't hear that, but you do hear Clarence Thomas playing constitutional chess. And I feel like everybody else is playing constitutional checkers. And I kind of, you know, I'm a layman and I don't understand the lack of political thought that needs to go along with this decision that has come out. But I'm going to let the people in the street, you know, do what they do, but I'm not going to be out there with them.
I'm not
on this. Not as a reparationist.
Well, I want to speak to that point. Actually, you raised a very good point. You know, there's a case to be made that the people who are in the street right now don't really need to be focused so much on legislation or trying to work behind the scenes, because it's the majority of white women, and when they yell, people respond. So they already have people who are working in the government who are going to hook them up anyway.
The person who leaked it from the Supreme Court was obviously an ally to these white women. They still trying to figure out, they're using the Secret Service to find out who did it. So that lets you know, this is a fight between white men and white women. This is really not, and I don't know if the sister might disagree, but this is really not about Black women. Black women are going to be impacted by the decision, of course, but the decision that was made was not with us in mind, period. This is about forcing white women to have white babies, period. The decision was not made for Black women. We're going to be impacted by it, of course, like we impacted by all other decisions these people make, you know, but the decision, this is a fight between white men and white women. And I don't think Black people need to be used as political footballs between the right or the left, period. That's me.
All right. No, I feel you. I actually got one more of my guests coming in. Friend of mine, friend of the show, and somebody who I always refer to when I need data, because this brother here is the king of data. I'm gonna bring him in real quick. But brother Mike Rennie Toure, how you doing, brother?
What's good, man? Can y'all hear me?
Loud and clear, brother. How you doing?
I'm good, man. I mean, it's been a wild few days, but I'm good.
Yes, sir.
How's everyone else doing?
I'm good, brother. Good to see you.
Good. Oh, good to see you too.
Yeah. We holding steady over here, brother. My sister Friday's in here. Zakia is right here. I'm glad you could join us, man, because I wanted to definitely have your input on this. You know the topic already. We're talking about a lot of things, but we're talking about how our so-called allies that automatically single out Clarence Thomas and make him the poster boy for this legislation. I mean, for this ruling, and use the most hateful, despicable slurs against him while completely ignoring the other 4 justices who went along with it. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that, brother.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's a very interesting phenomenon that's been going around, particularly on social media and 24-hour cable news. Like my initial reaction to anything Clarence Thomas does has always been fuck him. Like that's always been like, you know, my initial reaction, because the guy, you know, is extremely interesting, especially as it pertains to his views. So when it came to exactly, interestingly enough, though, if you actually get into like the history of Clarence Thomas, he actually comes from a more radical position. He believed that basically the United States would have to fall eventually, and that there was no real cure to racism, at least systemically, within legal jurisprudence, that there was no real solution, and that the conditions would have to get so worse, so bad, so bad that we would basically have to burn it all down, in air quotes. So he has been on like a 40-year spurt with liberals. Like he has a very, very vicious and vehement disdain for like liberals, for white liberals in particular. But my first reaction to anything. Yeah, my first reaction to anything people say about Clarence Thomas has always been like it's well deserving, and in most instances it is. But when I started to because I've always been like fuck Clarence Thomas, but when I started to see like white women in particular using like the N-word and suggesting that his rights were next, I always find that that sentiment interesting anyway, right? Like that they're coming for Black people's rights next. Because if people have been following the trend of history, Black political rights have always been contentious in this country. Like Black political rights have never been established or ensconced or grounded in any way. The minute that Black people got nominal civil rights or nominal voting rights, it's always been up for grabs. It's always been contentious. It's always been precarious, right? So this idea that we just had established ensconced rights has always been interesting to me. But on the second point, the fact that these white liberals feel that they're justified by using the N-word isn't necessarily surprising, but the fact that they're doing it in public just shows that they could not wait to show their ass. And so what has happened, and we've seen this time and time again, is that Clarence Thomas just becomes a placeholder for black men in general, right? They use this antipathy towards Clarence Thomas as a placeholder to just, subscribe those attitudes against all Black men, despite the data that shows that Black men are the second most supporters of abortion, at least since 2018, based on the American election study of 2018. So it's like, it wasn't surprising, but it was interesting to see.
Okay. And now that I have you here, I want to move into another topic that's tied to this. If you're going to talk about how free that so-called white allies are with using the N-word and calling Black men porch monkey, we have to get into the white supremacist origins of white feminism. White feminism, I don't really make a distinction between all these different variations of feminism because it's all tied back to white feminism. It's all tied back to feminism, which is tied back to white women. Ever since the days of Susan B. Anthony, there's always been this divide between Black women, Black men, white women, and white men. And a lot of this comes down to the fact that I think in in feminist thought, nobody really wants to deal with the history that a lot of feminist thought comes from the idea that white women are trying to compete with white men for control and for power of everybody else's resources. That's just the bottom line, and nobody really wants to talk about that, to the point where they will recruit other races of people to help along with that project, but they are very much delegated to the junior role, except for one or two people that they will lift up and put side by side with somebody who's a white woman, as long as the white woman is in control. We saw that with Sojourner Truth. We saw that with the disputes between Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass. Can you speak on that a little bit and talk about some of that history?
Absolutely. The history of white feminism, in many respects, starts in the later 19th century, when you start to get the emerging right suffragettes who were also abolitionists. There's this interesting dichotomy, bifurcation, and conflation that we get when we suppose that white people were, abolitionists, right? We just assume that white people assuming that Black people deserve to be free meant that white people also assumed that Black people were equal, right? And that is not how history has played out, particularly for white women. So you have suffragists like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, Rebecca Latimer Felton, Phoebe Cousins, who started to articulate a premise that if Black men were to garner the vote, they would come not just as vicious, but more vicious than white men, particularly towards women and children, right? And we know, I mean, studies have been done now. Like, there's a book called All Bound Up by Martha Jones Rogers that talks about, you know, the political votes that black men, when black men garnered political rights, they used it through a vehicle in a sense of community. Esla Barkley Brown talks about this as well. But these white suffragists were known to have a particular disdain and vehement hatred for black men. So you've had Rebecca Latimer Felton, who would argue that, you know, she would, you know, like cut off her right arm before she would, you know, give the vote to the Negro men.
That was Susan B. Anthony who said, I'll cut off this right arm of mine before I give the vote, before I work for the vote for the Negro.
Exactly. And you had people like Phoebe Cousins who argued that, well, if black men ever garnered the vote, they would become more vicious than white women because they learned this viciousness through the white male slave master. And you know, all of these articulations of black male, give me a second, of black male, all of these articulations that black men would of course become vicious and threats to their community. So this is the kind of articulation that you get.
This is such an important connection.
Yeah,
I appreciate this.
Absolutely. So this is the articulation that you get in the latter 19th century. And what's interesting about these arguments is that it wasn't the fight over women's suffrage and this idea that black men shouldn't be garnered these rights was really over a very patriarchal idea based in this idea of civilization. And so the way that we understand gender today does not map on how gender was expressed in the 19th century. In the 19th century, gender was an expression of civilization. So while there were sex distinctions amongst various ethnic groups, gender was thought to be a means of civilization. So this is why savage races, or races that were darker, African, Asian, were thought to be feminine races. Like, as a matter of fact, black people were thought to be the ladies of races. Like, they were thought to be a feminine race. And so when white women were articulating that they needed to get the vote over black men, they were actually arguing that they were a more patriarchal group than black men because they were more civilized than these savage men. And so today we understand gender more through the social construct, you know, and we understand gender not as flattened and biologically determined, and not through these civilizational epics that it was in the 19th century. So what people need to understand is that this articulation that white women were arguing was the patriarchal right to lord over black nations. And that's what the vote was for. We currently have a liberal concoction that white women suffragists were for equality. Hell no.
No, they weren't.
Like, you could believe that that dogs don't deserve to be in cages.
That's revisionist history.
Exactly. You can believe that dogs don't need to be in cages, but that don't mean that you believe dogs are equal to you. And this was the argument that a lot of these white suffragists were making. Sure, right. Set them free. They can't live here though, because they're not equal to us. So we had like the Colonization Society, the American Colonization Society. Remember, a lot of abolitionists were also within these movements for the American Colonization Society. They said, sure, let Negroes free, but they can't stay here. They got to go, you know? And because they didn't want black people to garner voting rights, because you gotta understand, the political is extremely important, right? We understand that the social and the economic is important, but the political is important because you get to dictate the means, self-determination, you know, and that's one thing that Black nationalism and Pan-Africanism have always taken up, right? Like this idea of self-determining yourself. But that's just one, you know, very, short understanding of how white feminism sort of emerged in the later 19th century. You start to get a little different arguments towards the mid 20th and in the later 20th century as you get the 1970s. Because now, instead of arguing that black men weren't civilized and weren't patriarchal and thus didn't need voting rights, you start to get the articulation that Black men only want power because they are patriarchal. And you get this from Schulich, 1970s dialectics
Schulich
of
Firestone, the
sex.
dialectic of sex.
Exactly, yeah. So
and I just want to say, I want to say something. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just want to let the people who are watching know, a lot of what we're dealing with and a lot of the things that you see on social media and a lot of the jackleg theory you hear about men, especially Black men on social media from people who haven't read, comes from this book by Schulich Firestone called The Dialectic of Sex, where basically what she did was she studied the Black Panthers. But now when I say study, I don't mean she really talked to any people in the Panther Party or anybody in the movement. She basically went to a few Panther meetings and watched and looked around at people.
And she really focused on Eldridge Cleaver of everyone else. Yeah.
Exactly. And she focused on the fact that these were Black men in leather jackets and berets carrying shotguns and rifles. And she drew the conclusion, she extrapolated from that the movement was patriarchal. Therefore, all Black men were patriarchal because they wanted the same power of white men. So that's where it comes from.
Funny about
and a lot of people who are saying that don't have no clue about that book, but that's where it comes from. Go ahead, brother.
That's exactly where it comes from. This idea that Black men wanted Black power because of patriarchy, right? Now, Michelle Wallace is going to take up that same argument in Black Macho, the myth of the superwoman. But when you actually read the dialectic of sex, she's extremely nasty towards Black women in particular. Like, it's so interesting because what people have done is just basically regurgitated her arguments about Black men and just erased the ones that she made about Black women. Like,
right.
Literally, in that book, she literally talks about, she says that Black women are jealous of white women. She says Black women are extra aggressive. She makes all of the anti-Black tropes you can think about. She
was mad at the Black women. Let's talk about the Black women who were anti-feminist, Black women who pushed back when they came to the South, including Fannie Lou Hamer.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, we don't want no parts of this.
Absolutely.
I'm married to a Black man. And what are y'all talking about? So that's why she had to be nasty towards Black women, because at least at that time, you did not have a strong cohort of Black women who identified with feminism at all.
Not at the time. Yeah.
Not at that time.
And it's actually interesting because when you get to the question of abortion, at that time, you got to understand.
Black women wasn't for abortion.
Yeah, it's just a fact. Like,
it's a fact.
When we talk about abortion
even now, Rennie, there's Black people as a whole, it's still less than 50% that actually support full-fledged on-demand abortion. And I have to find the link to post in the comment, but a brother who's actually a professor at Columbia, he hit me up on the side because I've been having nuanced conversations around this decision on my page, because people think that because Black people vote Democrat that we just agree with everything that white liberals do full-fledged, and we don't, especially around that issue.
Yeah. And that's the thing about it. This issue specifically on abortion is a very contentious and it's one of those issues that when you look at the trends, because I've been trying to study this issue a little more in depth. But when you look at the trends, there's nothing static about people's opinions on abortion. Like, you literally have decades where so for the most part, you've had decades where white people were just more likely to accept be for legal abortion, right? And Black people weren't necessarily that way.
No.
But those trends changed over 40 and 50 years.
It has.
And so you've had past circa 1990 where white women and Black women were more like neck and neck, and then you sort of see Black women pass white women as more as more in support of legal abortion. And so
let's talk about what types of Black women. These are Black women of a particular class, I believe, because if you still go into certain communities now in our hoods, I mean, you're still gonna get a nuanced perspective.
Yeah, and a lot of the reason why is because remember, there was a very during that 50, 60, 70 period, there was a very there was this very real disdain for Planned Parenthood due to Margaret Thatcher and stuff.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah,
I want to segue into that when you get done.
With it. Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So but those trends have now changed. We live in a very different time. So like one of the things that I try to like let people know is like, as it pertains to abortion, like these aren't like opinions that are static. Like what really helps the opinions of people is, you know, really like a propagandized, you know, there has to be narratives
Black
that go at
like,
people,
yeah,
you know,
man.
yeah. And though I've always been extremely pro-choice, I've always been like, you know, I'm let people, you know, talk why they feel this way about I've like, now we're in this idea where like these ideas are supposed to be static, like, and they've always been static. They've never been that way. Unfortunately, that's just not the case. It's like,
I want to say something about that, because I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to move into that conversation next. A lot of the conversation in Black communities, outside of like upper class Black communities, a lot of the disdain for the idea of abortion comes from Margaret Sanger. And the reasons are a little bit different than most people think. A lot of the urban myths around Margaret Sanger was the fact that she started, you know, she tried to push abortion into Black communities to try to destroy like Black birth rates and kind of like decimate Black populations. That hasn't necessarily been proven, and I want to pull up a few things. And I just want to give some background. Margaret Sanger was a eugenicist, but the genesis of that idea in the Black community comes from the Negro Project. She launched this in 1939. The stated objective, or the service objective, of the Negro Project was to provide safe contraception, not abortions to African Americans, but contraception. It was developed by white birth control reformers, but nobody was really feeling it in the Black community because there weren't any Black people who were really supporting that on the surface and in the face. It was all white doctors. So what they did was she encouraged Black leaders, some who might surprise you: Mary McLeod Bethune, W.B. Du Bois, even Reverend Adam Clayton Powell, and several other influential religious leaders.
They still doing it today.
Yeah, but notice all of them are Christian though.
Yeah, hold up. No, we're not done though. I'm gonna show you this. The reason that came about was because she was influenced by the ideas of eugenics that me and Zakiya talked about earlier. And the ideas of eugenics that she was based on was saying that you have to have, in her words, a sort of clean, healthy breeding stock to create healthy races.
Right.
That was a very prevalent idea in the 1920s and 1930s. Fascism took it to this extreme.
Very royal. The royals
Say
put
again?
their genetically non-perfect people into all kinds of asylums and stuff like that.
Yeah, even in their own family. That's another conversation. But I'm going to pull something up really quick. Again, you know, her ideas were influenced by the eugenics movement and the progressive welfare programs of the New Deal that came out of the FDR New Deal in the midst of the Depression.
Right.
The whole idea of her being a eugenicist came from this. There was a letter that she published on December 10th, 1939. It was to a program director for the Negro Project, advocating Black physicians and ministers gain the trust of Black communities. And I'm going to show it right here. I'm just going to, this is an excerpt from the letter. This paragraph is where a lot of that mentality comes from and a lot of those ideas come from. Sanger's concern was to avoid suspicion that the program's objective was to stop Black people having babies, which having white people in charge of the program could create. And this is from the letter, and you can read it along with me. The Black minister's work is also important, and he should be trained, perhaps by the Federation, as to our ideals and the goal which we hope to reach. We do not want word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population, and the minister is the man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs to any of their more rebellious members. Now, when he talks about rebellious members, we're talking about Black churchgoers and Black people, men and women on the street who are suspicious about why these people are moving into their neighborhoods. So there is no historical basis that says that she was strictly trying to exterminate Black babies. But if you take the context of that letter,
but yes, she was.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, if you take the context of that letter in the context of that time, you can draw your own conclusions. You know what I mean? You don't have, you can say a thing without having to say it. You know what I mean? It's almost like the Wannsee Conference. Nobody in that meeting said we want to exterminate the Jewish population.
Today, y'all.
Her dad was a Nazi, I think.
Her dad was absolutely a Nazi.
Or he was supporting them or something. Yeah, something like that.
Here's the name of a sister that a lot of us have never heard of that I literally just learned about myself. And the lady's name is Dr. Dolores Greer, who was a part of the African American Society Against Abortion. And she's a Black woman, a doctor. They organized themselves because Jesse Jackson was the minister that they recruited at that time to push abortion in the Black community. So you had Black women themselves organizing themselves to be against abortion. So I don't know if folks are even familiar with her, but I know a lot of this history has gotten buried. And there's this idea that, you know, Black people have always just been so pro-abortion and
yeah,
you know, pro-killing.
It's never been true. Yeah, that's not true.
What's
interesting?
And so,
no, go
what's
ahead.
interesting too today is the fact that they're putting like the modern twist on the same argument is, you know, like Black women, you will live healthier, longer lives. So we're not going to talk about medicine and the fact that you're dying at the hands of Western medicine and mortality rates, you know, during pregnancy in our community is high. But we're going to say that somehow you terminating your pregnancy today is an improvement on your condition today, which I'm like if you want to be an ally in this space and in this time of this decision, you would be amplifying like women's mortality rates during childbirth to also be fighting like for that. Like you want healthier maternal rates and this and that, and you don't see it, but you see the same sort of arguments being made today.
Yeah. And there's sort of a flip side to that as well, because I mean, as someone like I said earlier, someone who has been pro-choice, who is pro-choice, like there's a flip side to that. Given the like brutal statistics that we know on Black women and infant mortality rates, it does seem a bit odd that they would want to push what they would want to, you know, basically disband the legalization of abortions and forced births, particularly in an epoch where Black women are 4 times more likely to die during giving birth. So that's something that I've always been like, is interesting in itself.
Friday, I want to go back to the point you just made. It ties into the original point of the conversation. I've noticed it just in the past, just since Friday, a lot of women's health organizations like NOW and a couple of other organizations have automatically suddenly found all these Black women who they put on TV to have this conversation about abortion. I have about this conversation, but I've never seen them any other time when there's a conversation about women's health. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know you're kind of like in ground zero of that, being out on the West Coast and everything. Can you talk a little bit about that? Not saying that these women haven't been working there, but it's like they went through their offices and found every Black woman they could find and put them in front of this. Sort of the same thing they did with Clarence Thomas, like making him the face of the opposition of it. Now they're making Black women the face of the pushback. But what is that really doing for the health of Black women? Is that helping them, or is that just giving them face and an image?
Well, I mean, it's the mule process. It's giving face time, and you really, I hate to say this, you have to wonder like what is their long-term program. As a reparationist, part of repairing Black folks is repairing the Black family. And so to me, like, what is the long-term strategy? If you have, I think Alito wrote in his opinion that Black folks are contributing to their own genocide through abortion. Now, I would argue that point because in terms of responsibility, you know, genocide is happening to us as a people and as a community. I would argue the point, but to the extent that you have a justice who understands the long-term implications, you have to ask those organizations, what is your long-term plan for the Black family? If this is the face and this is the voice you're going to put behind this particular movement, what is your long-term plan? And I don't think that they have one. And I shared in our chat, and it's on my Twitter thread from earlier today, maybe 5 or 6 tweets down, an article on The Atlantic about like who Roe was. I mean, I think she raised like one of her children. She gave up several of her children for adoption. This is definitely like but white.
She never had an abortion. That was a lie.
She never had an abortion. She, you know, this is a white woman, white male issue. And I think to Rennie's point, it gets back into patriarchy. And women, white women in particular, during slavery, right? They were on equal footing for the most part with white men. They could own chattel slaves. Yes. They could come into their own fortune. They could be
many were bequeathed to them.
You know, they were seen within Yes, they were her property. They were seen in a court of law. They were on equal footing during slavery. It is at the end and termination of slavery, all of a sudden white women had problems. All of a sudden their independence, they had to work for their own money, or they had to marry into wealth, whereas before you had white men marrying wealthy white women. And so the ending of slavery really put an end to that and created this need, if you will, for their feminism. But now today, with this face, like, no, you're not gonna catch me in these streets with you people. Y'all work it out with each other.
Work it out with your man. I ain't coming out there to protest about no damn Roe versus Wade. Not me.
You know, an interesting thing about Roe, the 1973 ruling, right? The decision. The decision never mentioned rape, and it never even, the decision had nothing to do with deciding on the circumstances that led to pregnancy, right? However, what a lot of people don't know is that how she gained attention was through a lie that she was gang raped, and she was advised
No, actually, yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah, I pulled up the data on that, and I actually have the whole story in front of me. Unless you want to keep going, and I'll
I was just going to say very, very briefly that she was advised by some friends to say that she was gang raped. So there's different sources that say that where she was raped or gang raped. But one thing that I think it was consistent was that basically first it was supposed to be done in a Texas court, and basically she lied and said she was gang raped by black men or raped by a black man. And that was investigated and was found out not to be true, right? But even though it was found out not to be true, and she admitted to this, she was bitter, she was frustrated, due to not being able to, get an abortion. Even though the investigation found out that it was not true, she still told the lie. She continuously told the lie. Mm-hmm. And eventually, when her case was picked up again, even though they never used that in the decision from Roe v. Wade in 1973, many people in the public believed that she was raped by black men. So the cultural apparatus
that gave
around
cover
Roe,
for the decision.
Right, exactly. So even though it was never used juridically within the reasoning in the process of the court, many people believed that she was raped by a black man, and so that gave it the basis in many people's eyes. But I'm sorry, you can finish, Torraine.
That was a strategy by white liberals. I hope y'all know that. Was a strategy.
Yeah, I'm gonna pull it up real quick. 1 second. The reason that came about was because the backstory of that original case is very dark. The original case that launched Roe v. Wade, like Rennie just said, came from the idea, and her name was Norma McCorvey. That's the name of the original woman who was Jane Roe in the Supreme Court here. She didn't technically say that she was raped by black men, but she did tell a lie and said that she was gang raped, because the backstory of that was in Texas at the time, there was no provision for abortion unless it was to save the mother's life or a rape. So she told a lie and said that she had been gang raped. Her friends and her social circle told her to tell the police that she had been gang raped by a group of black men. The police in Texas investigated and miraculously didn't find anybody, or they couldn't find anybody to pin it on. So she lied in that case. The Supreme Court did not consider how Jane Roe became pregnant. It was only focused on the fact that if she could get an abortion or not. So it's true that the original circumstances of how she became pregnant were not part of the Supreme Court decision. But the fact that she told this lie gave it momentum to get to the point where it would become a Supreme Court case to get to that far. Now, here's the part about it that's very, very frightening. She had two lawyers. One of them was never mentioned an alleged rape in court at the Supreme Court, and it formed no part of their legal argument. This came out in Vanity Fair in 2013. Again, like I said, the circumstances of how she became pregnant weren't part of the case. Right. But this is where it gets very dark. She continued to lie about being raped as the case attracted national attention.
Exactly.
She finally recanted this rape story in
1987.
Mm-hmm. I have it up right here. She went to the Washington Post, and she said basically that she admitted in 1987 that she falsely claimed to be raped in hopes of winning an exemption from Texas law. The new account came out during an interview she did in a Texas TV station, where she said, "I found out I was pregnant through what I thought was love. I told the doctor I wanted an abortion, that I did not want to carry the child for economic reasons. That's why she wanted to get an abortion." That did not go through in the Texas court, so she went and she ended up carrying that baby to term. But then again, it wasn't about carrying the baby to term or how she became pregnant. It was about her, could she get an abortion or not. In a 1993 speech at the Institute for Educational Ethics in Oklahoma, Sarah Weddington, who was one of Norman McCorvey's lawyers in the original case, discussed how she presented McCorvey's case during the lawsuit. And this is out of her mouth. She said, "My conduct may not have been totally ethical, but I did it for what I thought were good reasons." This is the lawyer of Norma Jean McCorvey. Now, consider what would have happened if a Black man had been arrested for McCorvey's rape in Texas in 1967.
Right.
And
I'm actually interested in whether one was.
Hold up. McCorvey stuck to that story up until 1987 when she recanted it because it benefited her. And her lawyer colluded to push that story. What does that say about how liberals or people who are supposed to be progressive are willing to use Black life to their own advantage?
Come on.
Well, let's talk about her. I mean, honestly, if in a modern day, like we're so used to seeing our people torn down. If they make a decision, they wind up in the judicial system. We got to look at their background. You have to somehow be this perfect human being walking your life in order for your case or your point of view to be defendable. And I mean, honestly, this is back in the 60s. She kind of had a hippies vibe. She had casual affairs with men. She had a brief
free love
at the age of 16. She also had relationships with women. She was all over the place as a young woman, and yet she gets to go in front of the Supreme Court with a half-cocked story that she leaves to the press, right? She needs that social buy-in, so she tells whatever story she needs to tell to the press, and then she gets to recant it in 87, but no one talks about her, but these women are all in the street. And we become the face of someone like this who's supposed to be protected. Why? She even changed her mind on how she felt about abortion, going to be pro-life.
She's pro-life. When she
right. But she on her deathbed,
she gets to flip the script. And we as a people don't really get to be what I call whole people. We don't get to experience this sort of range of wholeness that this woman was allowed to, and still is today, allowed to, with the Roe versus Wade case kind of on her wings. And she was not an extraordinary person, period.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It almost reminds me of the Carolyn Bryant sort of energy. It kind of reminds me of the same sort of energy in the reverse of like Carolyn Bryant. This woman got to live out her life on the backs of a lie that she told her destroyed a young Black boy's life and destroyed a Black family. Same sort of energy.
My thing is, bro, like once that lie gets out, there was an investigation done, right? So they're looking for a Black male. Do you really think Texas in the 70s? I mean Texas now, but Texas in the 70s wasn't like hemming up any Black male they seen to see if it was true. Mm-hmm. Come on now. And so, but it is, she on her deathbed, she said, because she did take a anti-abortion stance after the case, right? But then on her deathbed, she says that she was paid to take that stance. Is she a credible person?
I know she became really close. I know she became close to evangelical Christian. She got tied into that world, so they probably did. Who knows? Well, before we move on, I want to do a little bit of house cleaning. If you like the content we're making right now, just show some love to the channel, blow up the likes. If you want to help contribute to what we're doing, show love to the Cash App, TorraineWalker. My PayPal is TorraineWalker, or Patreon. I also have a Patreon, TorraineWalker. So if you want to contribute, feel free, give what you can, or just show me some love so we can keep these conversations going if you like what we're doing. It's fascinating to me because it almost feels like, kind of like what we're talking about at the beginning of this story, at the beginning of the show. If you have white skin and you say something is so, then it automatically gives you credibility to run with that as far as you can. And it doesn't matter how many Black lives you damage or destroy if you do that. as long as somebody else gets a benefit from it off our backs. And I want to tie into that I want to bring in another conversation. I think there's an idea in American society that because, as a rule, Black people tend to be very, very progressive, and we tend to be very, very understanding of everybody else's plight. As a rule, that we move along with what everybody else is doing. But I think what's happened in this case, especially with Clarence Thomas, even though he doesn't represent all Black conservatives, there is a very conservative streak in Black America that doesn't really get talked about. And I don't mean conservative as far as like the Candace Owens type or the people who they get out there to tap dance for like the GOP. There is a very family-oriented fundamentalist, and again, not the fundamentalist in the way that we understand it in America, a fundamental understanding of the importance of the family in Black communities that we don't really talk about, and a lot of the rest of the country doesn't really talk about as well.
Yeah, you
talk about that a little bit?
There is so many Black people are fiscally liberal and socially conservative. And so you do have these patterns of conservative values. Interestingly enough, as it pertains to the abortion issue, though, as education increases, people believe in legalizing abortions more. As religion increases, people believe in abortions less. Now, interesting enough, if you take religion as a kind of education, right? Because really religion is a kind of education. It's a kind of education in values, ethics, all kinds of things. Then you really see that there's a difference in ideology between so there's a collegiate education that people get, which produces a kind of ideology that pushes towards the kind of liberal views or progressivism. But again, as we know, what is understood as progressivism isn't static. Like in the 1950s, what's a progressive is going to be different than what it is today. But yeah, you do have people who are, socially conservative in our community, and a lot of us who come from, backgrounds of religion, that's where a lot of those socially conservative values come from. Many people whom, have the tendency of respectability politics, many who are tethered to this idea of a Democratic or Republican Party, because even Democrats are socially conservative, like Black Democrats. Some of them have very socially conservative values, and a lot of that is animated around maybe they're Southern Christian Baptists, or something to that extent. But, those are just some examples of Black people who would be socially conservative.
And even that's what I mean. That are considered not conservative, right? Our Black Hebrew Israelites are socially conservative.
Just like the Nation of Islam, they're very socially conservative.
Oh, Nation of Islam is definitely anti-abortion.
Yeah, and that's my point, and that's what I'm saying. I think there's a lot of different subsets. Well, I don't like the term subsets. There's a lot of different cultures in Black culture that people don't really understand, and I think because they see a Black man, they see Clarence Thomas.
Not monolithic, not
exactly.
culture.
Even though I hate that term, exactly. I think that I think the idea that because Clarence Thomas is a Black man, people who are outside of Black culture automatically think that because you're a Black man, you're supposed to think a certain way and you're supposed to legislate a certain way. And because he doesn't fit into that category, they don't know how to deal with it. Even though Black people don't really rock with him either, but the fact that he's in that Black skin and he's ruling in the way that he is, I think that shocks a lot of white liberals, and I think their shock is translated into what's below the surface, which is a lot of bigotry and a lot of hatred. It would be different if they were telling him to go to hell or they were cussing them out, but the fact that they automatically revert to these old school racial slurs says something more about them than it does about them.
There's no circumstance where that's okay.
And this, if you think about some of the justification for the argument, it boiled down to the Constitution. It boiled down to the fact that different states had different terms for abortion in terms of how long you could go out with your pregnancy before you could terminate. And the court did not want to have to adjudicate all of the state differences. And so it's almost like, in a way, they said, look, it's easier for us to just get rid of this thing than to say that this thing is constitutional, because then you literally can go up to the moments before you're delivering a baby and say, I want to terminate. And I don't know if any of you
in California, you can, in Maryland too.
the late term abortions, but what they do is like crazy. And in general, I don't think there are too many Black folks, particularly church folks, who are going to, even if they're pro-choice, they're not going to support that in the long term. And so I think that was an underestimation of liberals in terms of where and how our conservatism lies. And frankly, his rationale for the gun opinion that came out this week also, now he talked about freedmen and after slavery and access to guns and all of that kind of stuff. That's kind of radical.
Hey, he was right about that. I think that the clock can be
100%.
right twice time a day on the gun issue. I think he was right.
Who was saying that?
Clarence Thomas. Justice Thomas said
Thomas.
that. What he said? Go ahead, on Friday. Can you repeat?
Yeah, he basically in his reason for the New York passing on the rules that New York had, basically said that freedmen, after emancipation, were not allowed to have guns, and they were outlawed from being able to have access. We know the image, and I forget the veteran's name, I think he came back from World War I, and he was blinded by a mass.
No, that was in World War II. He was coming back from the Pacific, and he was on a bus in Alabama, and I think the bus driver told him to move, and he wouldn't move, and he a cop in Alabama, no, it was in South Carolina, snatched him off the bus and beat him so bad that he lost his sight.
Yeah, but he had his gun, and part of that accusation of him was about the fact that he had returned from the war, trained veteran, knowing how to use that firearm, and the firearm was part of the conversation. And so the decision that he made, and again, coming from California, where we know Reagan signed off after the Black Panthers rolled up to the state capitol.
1965. It's called the Morford Act. The Morford Act.
Right. Yeah. So, I think that
his name was Isaac Woodard. That was a veteran. His name was Isaac Woodard, if you're looking for it.
Isaac Woodard. Thank you for that. But we have to recognize our Blackness at all times. And even within the context of this Roe versus Wade, I'm a reparationist. Unlike what's the brother Van Jones, who thinks Dems need to deprioritize reparations. I think he has a singular view of what reparations is, and probably thinks it's tied to cash payments. But repair, all the ways that we were destroyed are all the ways that there needs to be repair. All the different departments of government are the areas and ways in which we can repair. And so I would push
all the way down to the family structure. And I know a lot of this is sort of a controversial thing in 2022, but even the idea that you have to have a wife, I won't say a wife, but you have to have male and female energy in the home and everything, that's controversial and everything. Not to say that you have to be married, not that it has to be tied even to gender. Just the fact that you need that if you're going to have a Black family.
It's balance.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, that's crazy. That's crazy. I do want to circle back and talk about one more thing. Let's talk a little bit about liberal condescension, because that's something that I think is very important. There was a study done. There was a study done in 2018 by Sidney Dupree, who is an assistant professor at the organizational behavior discipline at Yale School of Management. It suggests that white Americans who hold liberal social political views use language that makes them appear less competent in an effort to get along with racial minorities. Basically, in short, that a lot of white liberals dumb themselves down when they're talking to Black people. And I think that what we're dealing with a lot of this conversation and a lot of this controversy around the pushback against Clarence Thomas ties into that. Some of y'all, I know most of y'all have worked in politics and you've worked in grassroots organizations, and I think we've all dealt with the well-meaning white person who comes around and talks to us like we're a runaway puppy, and they try to talk to us like we don't know what they're trying to say, and they really condescend to the way we're condescend to us, how we speak. I think a lot of that ties into it as well, along with the idea of the good white person who thinks they're the good white person. And if you step outside of that, and if you try to challenge that, they automatically turn into Miss May Ellen from To Kill a Mockingbird. Man, I think some of that's happening too. What's that? Say again?
The whole idea of a good white person. But anyway, go ahead.
No, I'm saying in their mind. If they, I'm saying, they think because they're engaging with us,
I get what you're saying.
They're on the block because it's election time and they want to seem like they're your friend. Then they come out and they come at you with this really patronizing and condescending language.
And this whole thing, if you look at the timing of it, right, it's 2022. We're going into final elections. A lot of primaries are over. I think there's one more in Chicago, which for whatever reason, I think
we got primaries in Maryland too.
Which is okay. So we got a couple of that are late. But if you look at the timing of this decision and the expectation that Black folks are going to prioritize abortion over everything else is happening in our community,
right?
Like, no, this is not the time for us to stop off of, for me, our reparations demands. This is not the time for us to shift gears when it's come talking about economy, education, jobs. All of that stuff to me is about reparations. Medical, we just talked about mortality. All of that stuff is reparations. Interfacing with the judicial system, interfacing with police, looking at police budgets across the country. All of this stuff is reparations. Why would we at this point in time put all of that down to focus on abortion rates when the Plan B pill as of now is still available? It's right. Not, and I don't mean to diminish, this.
I'm in total agreement.
But I'm sorry, to the extent that young people can go ahead on to the pharmacy and get their Plan Bs, and they still can get Trojans, and they got all this contraception available. IUDs are still legal. All of these things are still legal. I'm trying to understand what the sense of urgency is here.
Let me ask you about that, because that's a very good point.
Yes.
As we said earlier about sexual health and reproductive health. Do you think there's a case to be made that because of this ruling, we might need to have a stronger conversation about protecting yourself sexually and contraceptive health and that sort of thing? Because you don't hear a lot about that. And I do think there is, and I do think there is a case to be made that because there is a streak of conservatism in the Black community, especially like in the South and in like religious homes, there's not a lot of conversation about sexual education and protection and that sort of thing. Do you think that could be that should be a place where people can direct their focus?
To parents. I mean, I remember seeing the letters come home with my kids when they were in middle school. So the conversations and the access to these things are already in a lot of middle schools and high schools. So again, when you start talking about the urgency and people who, let's say, don't know they're pregnant, I don't know. They got whole shows on TV with people I don't know and I went to the hospital and had a baby. I mean, those things happen. But my point is, for the most part, I think that people protect themselves. I think that is part of our culture. I think that if you survived AIDS and the AIDS epidemic, that became part of the American culture to protect yourself sexually. So
can I say something about that? I was a teenager when I think I don't know when it happened first. But I was a teenager growing up in Florida, and Florida already is a very hypersexual culture because, it's hot down there. Nobody wears a lot. We had Uncle Luke music going on. We really shouldn't have been listening to it, but that was the culture down there at the time. Everybody was doing their thing. And then I think it was Eazy-E died of AIDS first, I believe. No. It was, I think it was Eazy-E who died first. And that shocked a lot of people, but nobody really, it kind of made a lot of young people wake up. And then when Magic got it, that put the fear of God in a lot of Black men and a lot of young Black boys who were wilding out. So I came from that generation. Yeah. And that's when you started seeing a lot of brothers starting to wake up and be like, well, damn, if that can happen to somebody like that, I need to be careful. So I think what's happening is because a lot of people now, a lot of younger people, don't have that sense of urgency that they need to protect themselves. I think people do protect themselves, but I do think a lot of young men and a lot of young women don't. And the birth rate show that. So, I mean, obviously somebody's not doing that. So you're saying that you don't think there needs to be more conversation about protection and about sexual health and that sort of thing and how young people can protect themselves? I just want to be sure.
Yeah, I would never say that. I think, I think that society has done a good job of breaking down and breaking the Black family to a point where I think we could have significantly more meaningful conversations about what family means, what parenthood means, what those goals should look like. How those things should be part of your life plan, how choosing a life partner might not be the thing you need to be trying to do, from 14 to 21. Like that should be off the table because you should be building up kind of who you are and giving yourself leeway. However, if that's a choice you make as a younger person, I think family planning needs to be part of the conversation. All of these things that are not supported currently in our society, from daycare being automatic, for the pay cuts that women in particular have to suffer when they step away from the workplace and then return to the workplace. I think there's enormous room. Again, this is a time where we should be pushing the idea of that constitutional convention, because there are a lot of things that we could be encoding into our constitution at this time. But we got women running across all of these protests and states across the country, but no one really is focusing on how to take this opportunity to build a better society. And to me, it's a missed opportunity. So no, I think it's an important time to talk about protecting oneself sexually amongst a whole platter of other conversations that need to be happening simultaneously.
So Key, I want to throw the question to you real quick. We talked a little bit about how white liberals have this idea, not all, but there's this idea that whatever white liberals are concerned about, everybody else needs to be concerned about. And if you're not concerned about the things that they're concerned about, then it's a problem. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know we talked about it at the top of the show, and you said you weren't really concerned with it, but I know you work in nonprofit sector, so I wanted to know, can you talk a little bit about that experience, like whatever white women feel like is important, that everybody else has to get on board with that, but it's never reciprocal? Because you did mention that before.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the going game, and I also stated that I actually don't play that game at all. You know what I mean? I actually practice real self-determination and community solidarity. And, I'll be really clear. I don't feel strongly one way or the other, but there are too many problematic things around Roe that don't get discussed, like the idea that they're using the stem cells from the fetuses and things like that to improve. They're saying they're improving quality of life. Well, whose quality of life? Why you ain't using them stem cells for the maternal mortality rate? You know what I'm saying? So, white people clearly, because they have the vast majority of the wealth in this country, they pull the purse strings for a lot of different people on both the left and the right. And usually you only see people go after the white people on the right, but we do not have that same energy for white racist leftists. And I think that is a very
so many of them
serious miscalculation on the part of those Black people that do that. Now, those of us who are grassroots, we clear. Malcolm told us already what the deal is between white liberals and white conservatives. We can't trust
wolves and foxes.
Absolutely. Yep. We don't need to be used as their political football. You got Black people feel like it's our responsibility to come to the aid of white women. Where do they do that historically? Period.
Bruh. Period. Oh my God.
Period. I'm not with it at all. And I think that I'm actually grateful that you're hosting this platform so that the people can hear these nuanced perspectives. I mean, I think the little slogans is real cute. My body, my choice, and all of that. That's cute. You feel me? But there is so many other things that is not being talked about when it comes to that particular issue, among others. Again, Black people must be self-determining. We cannot be following behind whether it's Candace Owens or any other, liberal, white, Black liberal on the left. The final point that I will make, everybody got the smoke for Candace Owens, Clarence Thomas, and any other Black folks who milking, money from these white folks ideologically on the right. But we never talk about the Black people who milking the whole white liberal agenda and pushing that. You asked me earlier, why don't we see more Black people pushing back online against these white liberal racists, calling Clarence Thomas a nigger and a porch monkey? Flat out. You don't see that because they're not going to jeopardize their money.
Oh, well, I was saying report them and telling people report them. Like, y'all got to go. You're making my platform experience unbearable. You must go.
And that's what I said earlier. Like if this stuff was going against Amy Coney Barrett, I'm butchering her name, I guarantee you that'd have been gone by that night. And I want to reiterate this for the people who are watching. Clarence Thomas is the face of this, but it was Samuel Alito, Clarence Thomas, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, who voted to strike down Roe v. Wade. It wasn't Clarence Thomas out there by himself. And I'm not making excuses for any of them, but that was a whole section of judges, but only one is getting all that smoke. And I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it. The N-words are not too much. He
also didn't even write the opinion. Alito did. And did y'all see where Alito pointed to the the disproportionality of black fetuses that are being aborted? Did y'all peep that? And
I read it.
You know, interestingly enough, that is a point that and it's interesting. Like, I hate the bifurcations because I'm one of those folk. Like me, I'm a Pan-African socialist, and many Pan-African socialists are also nationalists. And to me, it's interesting, like how we always work within this bifurcation. So liberal is right, conservative is wrong, right? And so it places this emphasis on
the
being
only
liberal,
place where
right?
The binary is acceptable,
exactly.
Right?
So it places this emphasis on the two-party system, right? The same structure and stricture that has been encumbering black people the world over, right? And I'm particularly, and though I'm a Pan-African socialist nationalist, I'm particularly an internationalist, like Malcolm was. And so I'm dedicated to black people the world over, right? So for me, it's so interesting how it's frustrating. Let me not even use interesting. It's frustrating that black people in particular, have been so wedded to the Democratic Party and the establishment, right? And it's interesting how when things don't go right within the Democratic Party, black people start making excuses for people like Joe. It's interesting because it's like, you do know, and if we being real, like, you know, they talk shit about Clarence Thomas. I mean, Clarence Thomas did give his opinion on, and he also spoke about, you know, taking down, you know, LGBTQ rights and all that other stuff. So people are a little bit upset about that. And so what's interesting is, like, there were very preemptive measures that your boy Joe Biden could have took. One of them is medication abortion. One of them is providing more resources for vouchers to travel for women to get abortions. There were so many different things. There was executive orders Biden could have put in place. In 2009, your boy Obama, who I'm not a fan of, who saw Africana in Africa going back in 2008, all of those bases in Africa, led by him in many ways. But your boy Obama pledged in 2009 that he was going to introduce legislation that would protect abortion rights for women. So I just find it extreme. Nancy Pelosi, these Democrats have been the most impotent, spineless motherfuckers I've ever seen in my life. And it's interesting because no one ever puts their feet to the fire. And notice what Kamala Harris does, right? She's in an interview. They literally ask her, will federal buildings provide abortions in states that won't? She said, you know what she tells them, well, I don't know about that, but I do know that there are going to be elections coming up in the fall. They're using the anger of women now to reelect them, just to do nothing.
But you know what, though? I think it's finally reached critical mass this time, though. I think this is the first time. This is the first time you see this. I'm just saying, this is the first time I've ever seen this many white women this heated. Even before, when the women's march and all that stuff was going on, I feel like there's something that's reaching critical mass where I think the Democratic Party, the establishment Democratic Party, is either going to collapse in on itself or it's going to get to the point where it's going to separate. That's just
the reason why I'm not convinced is because black people, and notice what the Democratic machine, they will big head black women up nominally. They will say, y'all the backbone of this country, y'all the backbone of this establishment, and do absolutely nothing. We are so used to struggling that you can give us shit, put barbecue sauce on it, and we'll just keep saying, hey, you know, it's getting better. Like, we have been so used to being fucked over by these political parties that we just accept it at this point. Like, it's just what it is. And that's why I do not understand why, given all we know, given what we know about the impotence of Nancy Pelosi, the impotence of Joe Biden, the impotence of how they allowed Mitch McConnell to muscle his way when they had a Senate and a House, right? How they allow him to muscle his way and put in 3 fucking Supreme Court justices because Ruth Gator's RBG, you know who they
that's another
she
one.
was for women. RBG, who also was racist. She didn't want She didn't want Obama to put another Supreme Court justice on there, so she didn't retire. You know what the excuse they made then? Y'all can't take. It's patriarchal to tell a woman she can't retire she has to retire at 87. Now
she didn't know what she was half the time. It was time for her to go down maybe 5 years before that.
Mitch McConnell muscled his way into getting 3 Supreme Court justices for Trump, and the Republicans can still do what the fuck they want each and every time. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I have a slightly different opinion, but I agree with you in terms of what you're saying. The simple disagreement I have in what you're saying, brother Rennie, is that I don't think the Democrats are actually being spineless, because if they actually wanted to do something about it, they would. I mean, clearly, right? I think that they play games with the language and say, look, now, like you said, that night, my email was full of fundraising from Democratic candidates literally all across the country. And so for me, I think that the entire population, including even white conservatives, all of us are being manipulated and pimped. Facts. I mean, they play we fight. Yeah, they play like, oh, we hate each other and we fight.
Facts.
That's game.
Yeah, but Nancy Pelosi, knowing that this decision was coming, literally was campaigning for a Texas Democrat who was pro life.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's true. That's a fact.
We know white supremacy plays both sides, and I would say in the reparations, they're intentional.
Justice Scalia and Ginsburg were like bros. They went to operas together.
Look, I don't really talk about this that much, but I saw this a couple years ago with my own eyes when I saw April Ryan and what's her name, Kellyanne Conway, kikiing at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. That's when I was like, well, I mean, I knew it, but seeing it is a totally different animal. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's all a big gang. Like Carla said, it's a big club and we not in it. Go ahead, Sister Friday.
It's a big game, but I think in the reparationist space, and as more people are becoming active politically, particularly in their locale, what you're seeing is a willingness to what I call playing politics. And I dropped an article from PBS that talked about 1 million voters switching to the GOP, which is raising an alarm for Democrats. And, you know, I've been saying this for a time, and I will say it here, that if you come from like a family of 4, let's say, and it's a mom and dad or 2 adults, and then you have some young people who are also eligible to vote, who are all in a household, 1 adult has to go to the GOP, 1 adult has to go to the Dems, and then the kids need to be independent or Green Party or something like that, so that we get to the point where Black people are making demands of everybody. Nobody gets to have a pass. And that 1 million number is significant because it's so hard to start a party. But if you could get 1 million people to vote for a president, that's about the 5% number that it takes to actually have the waterfall come down into a political party. Free money. If you can get, and I'm like, we're at a time at an information age where something like that can happen. And so there are reparationists who are part of the Freedmen Party. Y'all, you can have your people check them out. But I think that the old politics that a lot of the boomers know is actually coming to an end because Black folks are tired. And we tired.
And that's what I mean when I say about a critical mass, because, you know, Black people are tired and Black people are vocal, and we have tools to be able to kind of get these messages out. And on top of that, a lot of younger white people are tired. They've been tired since the Occupy Wall Street. But I think a lot of that energy, the same thing that happened in Black Lives Matter, a lot of that energy got redirected into all these different categories and all these different agendas. I think, and this is just my opinion, I think this decision on abortion with Roe v. Wade was the match that opened up this powder keg, because you see white women who aren't just marching and yelling, they are literally fighting against riot cops, and the riot cops are cracking them in the head. You've never seen that before, not like this. I mean, we all see video.
The critical mass of white women who are extremely anti-abortion. This is
True.
why that's what I mean. I think,
but that goes back to what Friday was saying. I think there's a lot of conflict that's happening over dinner tables that wasn't even happening, even when the whole situation happened with George Floyd. Because if you go back to the point that a lot of these white women, let's just be honest, a lot of them are focused on what benefits them and what doesn't benefit them. Abortion and being abolished in that way affects them severely. And I think there's going to be a lot of conflict, and there's going to be a lot of hell raising across a lot of dinner tables. And I think it's going to be almost like kind of the way Friday Jones would said about like moving people into different parties. It's kind of like the Civil War. Back to Friday's point, a lot of families did that during the Civil War. They'd send one son to the Confederate Army. They sent one son to the Union Army. Whoever wins, I'll have somebody who can carry on my legacy. And I think that's what's happening. Go ahead, Rainey, what were you going to say?
No, I'm just saying, like, the most detrimental thing that and again, it's part of the political Democrat machine. It's a very detrimental idea because it hinges on this idea that abortion rights rather, is about a critical mass of women. And so if you disaggregate the data, right, like you'll see more women are in favor for a legal abortion than men are, right? But it's like 48% to 52, right? But when you break that down by race and gender, you see that there's more white women who are likely to be anti-abortion. And there's more Black men who are for reproductive rights of women, right? And so when you have this idea that there's just this coalition of women who are, who are going to be joining ranks together to make sure this is implemented in a fair way, it's so detrimental because you're really not understanding that there's a demographic that has been pro-women's rights, period, even if it's reproductive or abortion, for a long time. And so I just think it's interesting, and these Republicans, like these white women, I mean, literally, a white woman literally got on stage and Trump and said, thank you, Trump, for protecting white life.
Sure did.
There's no, you know what I'm saying? Like the curtains are off, right?
The hoods are off.
And we also don't need to pretend that, and this is the problem with the two-party system too. When people get mad with one party, they just go to the other one. And that's always been the issue, right? Because when we as Black people are arguing for a political apparatus that is grounded in Black self-determination, you got to understand that this ain't about the Democrats and the Republicans. Like, we cannot continue to constrain ourselves to these two parties, because even those Black people that are going to be leaving and going to the Republicans, they still ain't on the side of Black self-determination. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, fuck them too. Fuck them more, maybe. You know what I'm saying? Like, this idea that, just because Black people get tired, they need to go to the Republican Party. No, because you know what's going to happen? There is a very way in which if Republicans, get to nationally ban abortion, they're definitely, I mean, they're going to lock up white women who did abortion, but they're going to lock up Black women too.
That's the other thing.
Of course.
Women up.
You know what I'm saying? Like, so that's a fucking problem for us. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, it's not just as easy as like once, just changing parties. We need to that's why political education is so important, because we need to find ways. We need to find ways to funnel resources into our community. We need to find better ways of addressing these issues. And again, it's not going to come from the white liberal establishment. We know that. They've been pimping us.
All right. I want to start winding it down. I want to ask the question. I'm just going to go around the panel. How can we as Black people, Black men and Black women, center our physical health and the health of our women without having to fight as part of an accessory to a white agenda? And how can we stop these people from feeling like they can dictate to us on what our concerns are, and especially pushing back against hateful racist rhetoric from our so-called allies? Zaki, I'll start with you.
I mean, I think that clearly Black people have to discard the idea that we have to have white people in our business all the time on either side. I think that we have to get back to having a self-determining mindset, in my opinion. That would help a lot. Political education. I mean, that's the main thing right there, because people are educated by these sound bites, or miseducated, if you will, by these sound bites on mainstream media and even social media in some respects. this is not an issue among other issues that you really can just propagandize without having deep conversation. I'm talking about us as Black people. And we got to stop using the oppressor's language against each other. You know what I mean? Like, they're like this panel, like we have to have internal conversations about what is best for us and how we move forward without white influence. And to me, that is what's most difficult, because I have to point to the fact, and I was discussing this earlier on Sister Dr. Mayat's YouTube channel, same conversation. There was an all-out assault on African-centered thinking and African-centered studies in the academy in the 80s and really in the 90s, where, you know, this whole idea of postmodernism really took root. That's what we're dealing with. That's what we're dealing with. And we're dealing with white Eurocentric epistemology. And that's what you see mainly on social media, is you got these Black people, and let's be real, if they've been educated in the modern academy, which the vast majority of them have, they have been terribly miseducated and propagandized and actually turned into enemies in their own community. Outside of a few folks, you know what I mean? You know, and I've talked about this a lot, but outside of a few folks, I mean, it's not an indictment on Black scholarship as a whole, but I mean, you and I see it. We see it. A lot of these Black scholars, particularly Black women, are extremely anti-Black, and they call it progressive.
Yeah, I know. Randy, what you got?
Piggybacking off of Sister Zakithia, man, honestly, we really have to resist the proselytizing of white liberals. This proselytizing has been, I mean, it's a century old at this point. And, you know, you mentioned the disbanding of Afrocentricity. Black Studies was also disbanded in the Liberal Academy through post-structuralist and postmodern epistemology. And I'm at the point now where we really have to resist this cultural what did my girl that wrote a Urugu, this cultural Asili that has been
Marimba
Ani, that has been, you know, superimposed. Doctor, absolutely. That has been superimposed because it has us, you know, it has us thinking in the very same ways that they think about the very same issues that they feel are most important. When we have a Black culturally centered political education, we understand that all of these things that have been happening in the Supreme Court are going to affect Black people tremendously, right? For example, the attack on the Miranda rights. Who do you think that's going to fuck with? This attack on using certain kinds of evidence for exoneration. Who the fuck do you think that's going to hurt, right? Especially in particular when, you know, 52% of exonerations are Black men anyway. I mean,
right.
But these were things that the Supreme Court just started gutting,
and they got nearly as much spend as abortion.
Exactly, and it's almost as if who's picking and choosing what the fuck we supposed to be mad about. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying that's not an important issue. Of course it is. Of course it is. The woman's right to choose is absolutely important. Reproductive choice and health is absolutely important. Particularly when you got Black women who are
reproductive health and reproductive justice don't start and end with abortion.
Absolutely, and I agree and I absolutely agree, right? And so, in Black women's maternal infant mortality rates is one indicator of that, you know. And so, who the fuck is choosing who and when we get upset about things? You know what I'm saying? Especially when we know that the rights that we've garnered have always been precarious, have always been contentious, and they've been being gutted ever since they've been placed on paper. So I really, so to sum it up, I think we have to reject this proselytizing of white liberals, and that's a battle in itself. That's a war because a lot of people don't think white people's ideas stink. Like they think that white people own philosophy. They think white people are the guardian of ideas. And so, and they also don't think that they are being influenced by white people. That's the most frustrating thing, because you have people who are being influenced by white people who think that the ideas that they're using are absolutely new, and they're not. So,
all right.
Yeah.
All right. So Friday, you had the last word. What's up?
Yeah, so I'm a reparationist. This answer for me is really very, very simple. We have a three-pronged approach, meaning we address federal, state, and our local municipalities in terms of where the repair is needed. So I would encourage people, follow me on social media. I am Friday Jones. Follow our national org, the National Assembly of American Slavery Descendants, at NAASD. Let's get this political education. Let's center ourselves. Let's work the three-pronged approach and get to where we need to be. So simple answer for me.
All right, let's have it.
Where they can find me as well.
I'm actually getting ready to do that next. I got you, sister. Let's start with you, Sister Zakia. Let everybody know where they can find you and where your work is.
Absolutely. Folks can follow me on Twitter at Zakia Shinyere. You should be able to find me from Torraine's page as well. I am Real Talk with ZSJ on Instagram. And you can also check out my YouTube channel, same name, Real Talk with ZSJ. And actually, both Torraine and Rennie have been guests on Real Talk with ZSJ. So appreciate this platform. Appreciate you hosting this very important conversation, brother. And let's do it again.
All right, Rennie, how about you? How can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, I'm on social media on Twitter. The name's right there at Rennie Torrai. Also wanted to say a shout out to you, Torraine, for hosting this space. Definitely a much needed conversation to have. You know, with a lot more nuance than you're gonna get on CNN and MSNBC.
That's why I'm not on there.
Yeah, same. Like, I could never. But yeah.
Okay. One thing I will tell you, brother, please stop. I love you to death, but please stop arguing with cartoon addicts, brother. Every time I see you on Twitter, you argue with a cartoon picture, bro. Quit doing
that.
Yeah,
that's COINTELPRO, bro. I had to ask him not to do that too. I said, man, this person got like 13 followers.
Yeah, I stopped arguing with the cartoon abbies, but a lot of these other PhDs, man, be trying it. So,
now that I don't mind. If you need, just tag me in. If you need some help with that, I'll be happy to jump in on that. But leave them cartoon abbies and disturb people alone, bro. You're wasting your brilliance. But go ahead. Just messing with you.
I already gave my information, so I'll put a plug into the Reparations Summit that is happening in Atlanta on September 30th and October 1st. We're trying to bring minds like the ones here today together to really formulate how we want to move our political agenda for the next 4 years. So please come through. I dropped a link in the YouTube chat to Eventbrite if people want to, come through with tickets. But this kind of thing we have to have and conversation we need to have behind closed doors. So thank you so much for inviting me. You've invited me before. I'm so glad my schedule was able to permit. This has really been a lot.
For real. Thank you. Yeah, send me the link too. DM me and everything, and now we'll talk a little bit more about that. Since it's in Atlanta, I want to be on that. So that's the end of the show. There's an old folk saying that Dolomite made famous called "Shine in the Titanic." Basically, it's about Shine was an old black stoker down in the Titanic who kept telling the captain that the water was coming up, and the captain kept telling him to go back down and take your black behind down into the water and keep stoking that furnace. And he jumped overboard, and when all the millionaires and everybody started seeing the boat sinking, they started yelling at Shine to come save poor me and offering him everything. And basically, the refrain of the poem is, "It's more on land than it is on sea. Get your ass in this water and swim like me." And that's what black people are gonna have to start looking at, the way how we move politically in this world. We got to look out for number one, and we got to let everybody else get in the water and swim for themselves because they already been doing it. We got to do it as well. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to the panel for coming through. Thank you for everybody who came to check it out. I appreciate y'all spending some time on your Tuesday night to come check it out. I'm gonna put the panels up. I'm gonna put this up again. If you like the conversations we're having here, show love to the channel. You can support us by Cash App. You can support me by PayPal. I also have a Patreon if you want to be a part of that. I'm getting ready to do tiers on that so we can have some exclusives for Patreon. Again, thank everybody for coming through. Thanks to the panel, and everybody have a good night. Y'all be good. Peace.
Hotel. Hold on, let me get her number before you take it off, bro.
And I got you, Zakiya.